Okay. So I'm having well, first of all, let me get a little sip here. Pardon me. Shout out to this Juicy Haze IPA from Voodoo Ranger. No, they're not supporting the podcast, but see, this is the fucking point, right? I get them on this motherfucker. I've never been one for IPAs. Just never really liked the sourness of IPAs, but and I'm aware that there are different types of IPAs, but I just never got hip to it until recently when I bought a multi-pack of Voodoo Ranger. My wife and I loved the multi-pack. It was a variety pack, rather, right? My wife loves IPAs. She just loves them. So anyway, I still like my Trulies, but a good IPA from Voodoo Ranger will be joining me this evening. This is the first time I'm recording a solo episode. I want to say 20 episodes. I'm going off. Let me take a look. Let me take a look. I think it's 54. Yeah, episode 54. My Journey Part 12. When I had my solo episode about my dad. And this will be episode 73. So 19. But I've been wanting to do a solo like I had the previous two episodes. I kind of ended season 2 on a streak of interviews, and I just didn't really want to do it then. And then I decided, right now is a good time. I've gotten started with the 3rd season, which is exciting. I'm busy, and I wanted to do a solo interview with myself. I'm interviewing myself. No, it's a journey, part 13. My journey, part 13. Calm before the storm. Why did I call it that? Well, that's pretty much what's been on my mind recently. Is there's I don't know what it is. I don't know. I feel like there's just this pause. I don't know if it's me plateauing with the podcast, me overthinking it, only 70 some episodes in. Don't mind my slippers, my house slippers, by the way. I'm mad comfy right now. Side note, house slippers, blue jeans. Shout out to Queso Frito, my boys, Carlos and Alexis. Bebo, I know they call you Bebo. My bad, bro. I don't know. I felt like I was introduced to you with a different name, but I think Carlos is laughing at me right now. But anyway, shout out to Queso Frito. I was just on their podcast. We did a t-shirt swap. So I just wanted to support my peoples, but I'm chilling. So anyway, let's get back to what I was talking about. Sorry guys. So there's a calm. There's a calmness. There's something, I don't know. I feel like I'm not doing enough, but I also feel like I'm doing a lot. I do feel like I'm on the right path, and then I'm like, why can't I get to the next level? I just feel like there's this calm, and the storm that's coming is what I've been asking for. So I know it's coming. I can feel it. But then there's this silence, and it's deafening. And it's like, is this a test to see if I flake out? Because I'm not going to, but I'd be lying if I said that it doesn't bother me. So that's what I've been dealing with lately. And I just wanted to do an episode around that. And also, the second half of this, by the way, salute to all those that are enjoying themselves this evening. Or afternoon, right? And if it's the morning, I'm not judging, really. Vacation somewhere, knock yourself out. But the second half of this interview will also, if those that remember or follow me on social media, I asked for some questions. I'll be answering those questions in this episode. Second half of this episode, question time for the journeyman. But yeah, so look, I'm really, really hungry, really focused, and I feel like I'm plateauing. So I'm doing a lot of research on AI, how to use it. Shout out to Los 280 Plus podcast. Got me hip to some of the things that, can be helpful for editing purposes for the podcast. And I'm very focused and driven. I'm not worried about that. I'll be honest. I feel like I'm stepping up to home plate. I'm ready to swing for the fences. And this motherfucker just won't pitch the ball. That's what I feel like. And, yeah, I'm ready to swing. And so I wanted to share that that lonely feeling. It's also humbling because I'm very aware that it takes a lot more than 3 seasons into a podcast. Approaching mid-70s episodes. I'm not like a household name in Lancaster yet, but the goal is to get there. The goal is so that when people see the podcast letters, JMC, the colors, the Journeyman logo, when they hear my voice, they know who I am. I believe I'm getting there. I just feel like I'm being impatient. Trying my best to branch out in other avenues to promote the podcast, to get eyes on the podcast, and I'm learning. It's not easy because it's not my lane, but I know that I have to make it my lane. So whenever you start doing something that you're not accustomed to, you start taking advice, you start researching. Shout out to Marquise Lupton. Shout out to LaRock Hudson. These fellas, send me some advice. They break shit down for me so that I could absorb it because they're hip to some things in this world. And you got to get people like that. You got to surround yourself with people that recognize the wave that you're on and they just want to support you. I'm getting hip to some things. I'm trying new things. I'm reaching out. I'm trying to get sponsors for the podcast. I'm trying to reinvent the wheel with the podcast, which is exciting. But it's also frustrating because it's like, fuck, man. Like, you know what it's like to go to work, to a full-time job, and just be like, fuck, you are in my way of my dream. Like, you are in my way of my passion. It's no disrespect. It really isn't. It's just me being honest. And I have to learn to be patient and to follow through accordingly because, yes, my full-time job is in the way, but my full-time job is also providing me financially, where the podcast isn't just yet. By the way, if you want to support a brother, buy me a coffee. It's on my website, and I'm putting it right at the bottom of this screen right now. Buy me a coffee. Go to this link, hook a brother up. I promise I'll probably buy a coffee here and there, but all of it won't go towards coffee. But you get it, right? You get it. And I won't buy Voodoo Ranger. Well, maybe a little bit. So the calm before the storm. I feel like I'm doing, how do I say this? I feel like I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to in regards to being consistent, engaging with my guests and my audience and the listeners and viewers of the podcast. Fans. There's a lot of people, I will say that do reach out to me every week when I share a new episode of a new conversation with a new guest. It opens up the podcast to new people, and it's awesome. It's like a wave of new eyes, new comments, new messages, and I'm grateful for that. I really am. Because this is how it's done, and I know that it's building your fan base. It's being open and transparent with them, with you, right? That's why I'm doing this solo, because I'm trying to be open and transparent. Because I don't know how else to be anything else. Like, I can turn it on as the host. Don't get me wrong, but there's times like I just want to relax like I am now, shoot the shit, and just be me. I feel like people can relate to that. But, something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. I can feel it in my bones. And I need to just stand at home plate and be ready to swing. Because when the pitcher decides to pitch the ball, it's going to be fast, but it's going to be right there. Easy swing, easy home run. I believe that. I don't watch baseball, so that was a pretty weak baseball analogy, but I mean, y'all are picking up what I'm putting down, right? But anyway, I'm moving along with the podcast, and I don't want to stop. That's the truth. I'm taking breaks here and there, but I'm hoping that you won't really notice that on your end. We're already going into October. 3 seasons, 2 full years. Going into my 3rd year. Yeah. I feel like I'm doing everything right. Not perfect, but I'm doing it right. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you're doing something, whatever it is you're doing. You're grinding. You're hustling. Deep down inside, you're nice. But you're just not getting to the level that you really want to be at. I get it. So, to everybody that's out there doing their own thing, hustling and grinding, I salute you. I do. And I've interviewed a lot of people that are doing their thing and they're grinding. And I've got interviews booked with people that are grinding, doing their own thing. One way or another, just trying to be happy and follow a passion. Be ready to swing. The pitcher will release this ball, and this ball's coming. Be ready to swing. I feel it. I feel it like I feel this nice cold Voodoo Ranger Juicy Haze IPA. Yes. I've got another one in the chamber right now, but it's I think it's called Voodoo Vice. It's got like the Miami Vice situation. But I got it in the chamber, staying cold. That's how I roll here on JMC. I keep one in the chamber and I keep it cold. Okay? You don't want to drink warm beer. I don't care how much you don't want to leave fallen soldiers in the battlefield. Sometimes they just need to be left and let be. All right, well, I think right now is a good time to carry on to the second half of the interview. So once again, the calm before the storm is taking place in my life. Maybe it's taking place in yours. Be steadfast. Like my mom told my wife, and like my wife tells me, be still. Be still. Okay? You got this. I got this. We got this. We're going to be all right. We're going to be okay. I promise. Now, let's move on. Several people hit me up. So, I'm going to read you some of these questions, and I'm going to answer them. No particular order, but I will start with my Komai Romy, my daughter's godmother. Shout out to you, Romy. Romy Lopez. Where are you? Okay, here we go. Romy is asking me for JMC, what's on your bucket list? That's a good question because I never really thought of it before. And when I think of it, I feel like I have to have some elaborate list. So for the podcast, for JMC, okay, bucket list. Let's just be completely honest here. 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, right? Monetizing the podcast, YouTube included. Sponsors. Quit my full-time job. Yeah. Those are, what's that, 4? Is that 4? 4 or 5. Oh, fuck. Quit my full-time job, monetize the podcast, 1,000 subscribers. I can't remember. But anyway, that's a bucket list. I think that's a really good bucket list for JMC. And I've had things checked off the bucket list. I wanted to upgrade my equipment, and I was able to do that through Lancaster Equity Foundation with the fund, which I'm very grateful for. So I was able to do that, and then with that, I was able to really focus my content on YouTube more. So those are two things that I checked off my bucket list. I have people reaching out to me for interviews, which was something I told my wife from day one was a goal of mine. The goal was to get people to come to me. And I feel like as much as I still reach out to people, because I do, there's a ton of people that I've interviewed that only know of JMC because I reached out to them. I'm not too proud. But I got to be honest with you, when you have people reaching out like, hey, I would love to get on the podcast, or hey, what kind of podcast is it? That type of feeling, man. Or when you reach out to somebody and they're like, oh man, I've been wondering when you're going to message me. Like, I've had that too. So I've had some things crossed off the bucket list. And so I'm looking forward to crossing off some more. And again, it isn't so much like a popularity thing. It's more like to strategically put myself in a position where the content that I'm creating, the interviews that I'm sharing and creating, the time that gets put into this shit, all this shit, like I'm in my house, I'm in my family room right now. Like I'm not even paying for studio time because I don't have the money for it. So I got to make this happen. I share videos all the time of me moving the furniture out of the way. That's not a joke. Like that's not a gimmick. So it takes a lot of time to set this shit up. The end result is the payoff where I get the subscribers so that I can monetize. I get the followers so that I can get more eyes on the podcast so I can monetize. You know what I mean? So I can sell more merch. It's just, there's always, it's a domino effect that when you start getting into something that you're really passionate about and you start having to put on different hats, you have to learn that shit on the fly sometimes. And if you're not dedicated, if you're turned off by it, you won't be dedicated and everything falls apart. There's a lot of this shit that I don't want to do. I'd rather just do this and then have somebody else take care of all the other shit. You know what I mean? I'm OCD and I'm picky as fuck, so I'll probably still be micromanaging, but that's, that's a different hat, but I can live with that. It's hard. It takes a lot of time. So being able to get to a point where when I'm doing all this and it's paying off, then it's worth it. Then the time, my time is valuable. My valued time then is honored. That goes with any profession. You know what I mean? So, yeah, thank you, Romy. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let's look on. All right, so I got another one here. This is from, we were just speaking about Marquise Lupton. My boy Marquise commented on the reel and that I shared about me starting these questions, and he asked a couple. So let's get right to it. This is from Marquise Lupton. What made you start JMC? How has your journey been? Excuse me. What's next for JMC? Have you thought about doing a live show at a restaurant or somewhere like Concrete Rose? Shout out to Concrete Rose and shout out to Marquise Lupton. Yeah, brother, let me tell you something. I'll tell you what, let's just start with your first question and work our way down. What made you start JMC? The Journeyman Chronicles, I've said this before, but maybe I haven't really had the time to really dive into what made me start it. Was a couple things. I've always wanted to do a podcast for years before I even knew that it was called a podcast. It was just like a YouTube channel. But you never really know what you want to do, and if you don't know what you want to do, then the process kind of stalls out. So it never really came to fruition. It was always something, but you're busy. People that you're working with or family, like my brother-in-law, David, we tried doing something, David and I, with Bro Church. Good times, laughing my ass off, but we could never just really get anything going because you get too busy with life. You know what I mean? And so I've always wanted to do it. Never really knew what it was I wanted to do. And then, while, working crazy hours, immediately after the pandemic and listening to more podcasts on the way to work and while at work, I mean, don't tell anybody at FedEx, but we're putting earbuds in our ears will turn the winter when our hoods up or up, because when you work those hours, you got to pass the time the best way you can. A lot of podcasts. I had Gary V in my ear non-stop. And Smartless was one. People's Party with Talib Kweli was another, where the interviews were intriguing to me. A lot of Radio Lab, intriguing storytelling. And I was always like, man, I could do that. I can do that. I've always loved telling stories since I was a kid. I can do that in a podcast. Couple that with the fact that I was very unhappy at my previous job because I felt sucked dry of having any time to really pursue a passion. I don't know if I talked about this before, but before the podcast started, I was aware that there was something I wanted to do. I needed to fill this void. And God bless Alexandra, because she really entertained me trying to get into different things. I was getting ready to study botany, to become a botanist and get into the study of plants and trees and shit. I was all about it. And I still like the idea of it. It's very intriguing to me, especially when you can keep things healthy and alive. But I was really like going to go to school and do it. And I don't know what the fuck I was thinking, because I can't devote my time to that shit. I was going to get into carpentry and build, cigar boxes. I was Googling and YouTubing how to build cigar boxes out of different types of cedar wood, Spanish cedar, and the tools. And my wife surprised me with a cutting tool. I think it was some sort of jigsaw, that I haven't used since then. There was something else too. I can't remember now. I was trying so many things to just get into. I was, along with botany, I was trying to study like grass, like what kind of grass and what type of grass and what grass grows better here, and then kind of like maybe build my own business. I opened and closed my own pool. So after doing that so many times, it was like, well, maybe you could open and close pools and have your own little side hustle. And it was like learning how to do that. I was trying to find something to fill this void. And for whatever reason, a podcast of interviewing people about their journey just came sliding into my mind one day while I was at work, and it clicked. And so that's how JMC came about. The Journeyman Chronicles, obviously, when I used to rap back in my heyday, I referred to myself as the Journeyman, because at that time I was going for my journeyman's license in electric. And to get your journeyman's license in a craft, I kind of said that this was my craft of emceeing. I'm the journeyman. It was something that I did. So I kind of stole that from myself, and I reapplied it to the podcast, which it really worked out well. It was just one of those things where I just didn't fuck with it. I changed the logo here and there, but the Journeyman logo, the actual Journeyman logo itself, has always been the same one way or another. It's still, the colors have changed, and I maybe rearranged the font here and there, but I don't ever plan on changing it. I think when I was able to kind of break it down to JMC to make it more noticeable and easy to remember, I found the sweet spot there. I don't want to fuck with that anymore. So that's how that happened. How has your journey been? I may have already touched on that, but it's been exciting. It's a lot of hard work. I think people should be aware that if you're going to start a podcast, and I've already seen it. I've already seen people start podcasts and then they stop because consistency is key. Even if no one's really listening, you got to be consistent. Otherwise, the longevity game is nowhere in sight. You got to be able to be consistent with the bullshit so that 3-4 years from now, if you're still pushing and maintaining the ability to be fresh and new, you're going to be up there with the best of the best. That's in anything you do. You have to be consistent. You have to be willing to see the end result while there's no end result in front of you. Hence the beginning of this episode, why I feel like I'm at this standstill, because that I feel like I'm at that point where I know it, I see it. I'm just having a hard time being patient. I'm ready to move. That's the hard part about this podcast, this journey of mine. And the editing that goes into this. You have to have a support system. Like I have the best support system in Alexandra, my wife, my kids. Every Wednesday, everybody in the house knows it's interview night. And my wife takes the girls and the kids do their own thing. And 6 p.m. rolls around, I start transforming my family room. So the journey has been phenomenal because I'm learning a lot about myself. I'm actually doing things that I thought I would never do, like pursuing a passion, to the point where I'm still blindly making these moves without really having any guarantee. I don't have any money coming in. There's no contract. I'm just doing this off the strength of the love I have for it and the vision that I have. And it pays off because people are enjoying it. And I feel good when I do it. Every time I'm interviewing somebody or I'm preparing for an interview, it's exciting. The editing part, like I said, it's hard. But when you put it all together at the end, you throw some music in there and you edit it the right way and people just appreciate it, that's the best. Especially when the person that you're interviewing responds after they watched it and they loved it. Because, it really is sharing somebody's journey. It's not so much what I'm doing. It's more so like, how am I relaying somebody's journey appropriately and correctly? So the journey has been a blessing. What's next for JMC? I hinted to that with the bucket list question from Romy. Personally, I would like to get to, this is tying into Marquise's next question, doing live interviews. Yeah, let's just say that. My goal is to do live interviews. Not every single episode would be live, or at least to start with. I would love to have a live audience one day, like to have the ability to be like, tonight we're having a live audience, and it would be dope to do it somewhere like at a restaurant. Marquise mentioned Concrete Rose. Hell yeah! First of all, shout out to Solis and Evita, because they're coming on to the podcast to talk about Concrete Rose and their journey in the future here. I've interviewed Evita already solo, and I'll be interviewing Solis solo as well. There's a lot of different interviews going on here with the Concrete Rose bosses. But when it comes to doing something like that, like, yeah, and I want to be able to have conversations with the Concrete Rose's and with other places too. Like I want to be able to touch people, to actually be there in person and shake hands, and you see me, and see that this is real. Like, I'm not putting on a show. I love what I do. Like, I love it. Yes, I thoroughly believe in myself. I know there's a lot of podcasts out there right now. There's a lot of good ones. Trust me, I listen to them. And I'm mad cool with a few of them. But I just know that mine's different. And when I have the opportunity to showcase it, and when that opportunity comes, I'm looking forward to it. Am I nervous about it? Hell yeah. There's something about doing it like where I'm at right now, where even though I could fuck up in the privacy of my own home. I could fuck up and edit it out so you can't see it. You know what I mean? This is different live. But I have no problem speaking in front of people because I'm just being me. So, that's what I would like to do next for JMC. JMC also, to wrap up Marquise's questions, which, my brother, thank you very much. Salute to you. To wrap that up, if anybody's watching my interviews, and they may have noticed that I kind of change it up week to week because I'm trying to find a different way of presenting it. But I am putting a JMC Productions tag in the beginning because eventually JMC Productions will be an umbrella corporation that will have podcasts, docuseries, independent films, with people of color having prominent roles. I don't have the ins and outs. I just have like this scope, this plan that I know JMC Productions is the umbrella. And there's a lot of different things that I want to get into because I would love to get into production, direction. A few of my episodes back, I talked about, a screenplay that I'm writing. Like, so I want to get into that a lot. So the podcast is the catalyst to something big with JMC Productions. And I kind of don't talk about it too much because I like to keep it close to the chest because that is something that, though I am confident, I'm also very naive in that field. And I just know that it will get done. I just need to really wrap my arms around it, wrap my head around it, and absorb it and get educated in some things. But that's what I have coming up next for JMC. So shout out to you, my brother Marquise Lupton. Thank you very much. All right, let's get to the next question. This is from Shelby Elaine, phenomenal storyteller in her own right with her pictures, photography, and her storytelling is remarkable. And Shelby, I'm going to be reaching out to you soon to get you on the podcast as well. There's a couple questions here. Hello there. Here are my questions. What is a quote, saying, scripture, or motto that you live by and why? Let me read all these first. Because number 2 is, what is the one thing you've learned about yourself through your journey as a podcaster storyteller? And what are your favorite kind of stories to share? What is a quote, saying, or scripture, or motto? I have to be honest. These are really good questions, by the way. Thank you so much, Shelby. There are some quotes and or mottos that I am a huge fan of. Not so much scripture because I don't follow it. Like I don't know it memorized. As far as quotes and motto, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I know there are some. But I have to be honest. There's one that I wrote a long time ago when I was going through my divorce, and I was, and I talk about this in the very beginning of the podcast, so I don't want to get too far into that. But I was just in my low of lows, really down, and these words kind of came into my mind. I don't know if it was God talking to me. I don't know if it was an angel talking to me. I don't know. But it goes like this. What does it take for someone to realize what they so desperately seek has been in their possession the entire time? It takes a swift fall from grace. That's it. So every now and then when I get really caught up in something, frustrated, angry, I remind myself that whatever I'm looking for is already here. It's already here. It's been in here. It's been right here the entire time. I just need to take a step back and acknowledge who I am, what I'm capable of, and that I got this. So that's a quote. That's mine. That's me. That and y'all are more than welcome to use that, by the way. But I do use that from time to time. That was a really good question, actually. I'm really bummed that I can't think of the ones that I actually enjoy listening or reading. Because when they come up, I take time to read them and I love them. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. Number 2, what is the one thing you've learned about yourself through your journey as a podcaster, storyteller? I've learned that I can articulate not only myself, but somebody else's story. I can articulate it in a way that everybody can understand. I can articulate somebody's story that might be shy, and I can present it for the world to listen to that they're comfortable with. I just have that ability. That's not bragging. That's not being boastful. That's just an honest take on what I believe my gifts are. But I didn't realize that about myself until I started the podcast. I always knew I could listen to people's stories, and whenever you're at parties and gatherings and you're kind of like shooting the breeze with somebody. But I didn't realize that about myself, that I'm good at that. Now, here's the flip, is that I've learned that I have this ability, but I need to be more patient and apply that ability with my own family. And I thank my wife for bringing that to my attention, because there was one time that she reminded me very quickly that I have this way of showing her that I need this story to get going. And there was one time where she was, telling me a story, and I must have just shown her that I was ready for it to move on. And she said, it's so easy for you to sit for a couple hours and listen to somebody tell you their journey, but you want me to rush through this story. and I'm your wife. And I was like, whoa. You know, you ain't never lie. So I really learned a lot about myself, the good and the not so good, and what I could build with and what I needed to build more of, if that makes sense. Because what I was good at, I could use that to build up the not so good qualities. You know, I needed to really take the time to listen to my wife, my kids, take the time and try to take those traits that I'm so good at during my interviews and apply them to my everyday family life. So that's something that I've learned through the podcast. What are your favorite kind of stories to share? Thank you, because nobody's ever asked me this question. I have to be honest. I like sharing the sad stories. And the reason why I like sharing the sad stories is because I feel like one of my purposes with the podcast is to give people their flowers and say, look at you, you know, like, look what you've done, and like genuinely mean it. Something as small as overcoming something that you went through in a couple months, or something as deep as addiction, or something as much as a loss of a family member, or sharing these stories brings us all together, because one way or another, we are dealing with something that's hard. And when you're able to listen to somebody break down and articulate what they're going through that mirrors your own journey, it's a sense of healing. When you hear that, it's like healing. It's healing. So those are my favorite kind of stories, because it's like the triumphant comeback that everybody's worthy of having in their life. And maybe they never heard it. Maybe they never had somebody say, you know, do you realize what you've gone through? Like, do you ever take a look at what you've done? I tend to ask that a lot in my interviews. Have you ever noticed how far you've come? Like, even now I'm getting goosebumps just asking that question, because it's like in a very vulnerable position when you're sitting in these chairs, especially when you don't know me. And I try to present a very safe and calm environment, a comfortable environment where people are okay being vulnerable. But when you're in that position, it's hard. It's hard. But when you can expose yourself, that's the humanity that everybody will relate to. And those are the stories that I love to share. Now, I love to share all kinds of stories, but it's those where it's just like, if somebody will allow me to go there with them and to talk about it, man, like the connections that those stories will make. The reels and the stories and the YouTube shorts that I make, the TikTok reels that I make, it's to plug the episode, but it's also an opportunity for me to share bits and pieces of some really important information that's worthy of being shared, so that we can all kind of vibe with it together and feel something and have that connection. So, you know, the sad stories, the sad heartbreak. Because we to exist, to suffer is to live. You know what I mean? And you can't live this life without suffering. It's just bound to happen. So it's human nature to feel that type of pain, and not everybody bounces back. And I feel that this podcast, I don't think it'll save the world. I think it'll help push people in a direction to be better people to save the world, because you're you're providing a platform for stories to be heard. Not everybody's an entrepreneur. Not everybody is making a lot of money doing what they love doing, and not everybody's a financial success. I have those on the podcast, but if you follow, you know that there are stories of everyday people just wanting to be happy and overcoming adversity and pain and sadness. And I think I realized that very early on when my friend Jerry Cahoot passed away. He was episode 4. He passed away shortly after the interview. It was that experience of losing my friend that I said, wow, I have an interview with him where he shared something so deep. He shared something so deep that his own family couldn't listen to right away. And when Jerry passed away, they finally took the time to listen to it. And it wasn't because they didn't want to listen to it. I think it was just a matter of just, the topics are touchy. And so when Jerry passed away, his wife, Danelle, and his son, Jerry Jr., I believe, forgive me, reached out to me 2 separate times, and said that they listened to it and they appreciated it. They were very grateful, not because of what I did, but more so for just giving their husband and father a space to be open about some things. That's documented. It's documented now. Now Jerry's gone. They'll always remember their husband and father. I'll always remember my friend. But that interview is there forever. And so when my wife told me one day, she said, do you know what you're doing? Like, you're giving people an opportunity to, I don't even know what the word is, to chronicle Journeyman Chronicles, but I can't even figure out the word I'm using, but to put in stone, to etch in stone, to put in history a documentation of somebody's life, of somebody's journey with their own words. Those are the stories that just move me. The underdog stories, the pain stories, the triumphant stories, So that was a really good question. Thank you, Shelby. These are great. Jasmine Taylor. I had Jasmine on the podcast. Shout out to you, Pan. Jasmine. Hey, I have a few questions for your solo episode. No pressure to answer them all. I'm answering all of them. And I have no pressure. Hold on a minute. I was wondering when you first thought of having a podcast. And what triggered that thought. And how long did it take you to do your first episode after that thought? And why did it take that time it did to start? What are the positives and negatives of interviewing others? Fantastic question. How does the podcast affect your personal life, relationships, works, health, etc.? Pan, thank you. So let's get right to it. When you first thought of having a podcast and what triggered that thought? Briefly already touched on that, okay? I thought of having a podcast while I was at work. What triggered it was my disdain for my current working situation and wanting to put myself in a position that I could follow a passion. With that came the idea of the podcast. How long did it take you to do your first episode after that thought? And why did it take the time it did to start? It didn't take long at all. I got to be honest with you. I came walking into the kitchen after work. My wife was in the kitchen. I said, babe, I'm going to start a podcast. And my wife turned around and said, okay. And I said, I need somebody to interview to start it, and you're going to be my first interview. So if you look at the very beginning of the podcast, number one is with Alexandra Arroyo. That's my wife. It didn't take long after that. September 1st, 2021 was the date the first episode aired on Spotify. Maybe a month, not even 3 weeks to a month. It was August. So I'll say 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I knew what kind of episode I was going to do. I knew it was going to be with my wife, and we sat in this family room. I had 2 USB microphones. There were 2 different ones, mind you, plugged into an old HP laptop that could not run the software that I needed consistently. It would shut down every now and then. I had the mic levels all set up. If you listen to that interview, man, sheesh. It makes me smile because I remember at that time being like, wow, this is number 1. And just being like, I'm ready. Let's do it. I was ready. Let's do number 2. Let's do number 3. So, good times. What are the positives and negatives of interviewing others? Thank you, Jasmine, because nobody ever asks that question. Positives, obviously, and I've already touched on this as well. It's listening to other people's story, helping them allow to be a little bit vulnerable, getting to know new people, learning things like, humility is something I deal with a lot because I'm reminded how blessed I am. I'm reminded that there's a lot of good people out here that all have different ways of thinking, that believe in all different types of things. But at the end of the day, love is always the root centerpiece for what they believe in. So that's one of the positives, or some of the positives. The negatives is learn. I'm trying. How do I do this? How do I skate politely here? Interviewing people can be tricky. So if you're going to start a podcast and you want to interview people, even if you're not doing a podcast, anybody that's interviewing anybody, maybe an article that they're writing in the paper for whatever reason, or a magazine, engaging with somebody and trying to put them in a position where they will give you as much information as you would like. It can be tricky. Some people have no problem just letting it rip and letting all the words come out and pretty much taking over and just talking. And all you have to do really is guide them and set these, pivots in the road to redirect the conversation or to branch off to a different part of the conversation. But sometimes some people don't really want to talk a lot. So you start realizing that you're going to have to put a little more effort into this conversation and talk more than your guest. Any interviewer will tell you that the key is to talk less than your interviewee. For example, if I'm sitting here and I'm talking to Joe Schmo and everybody's tuning in because I'm talking to Joe Schmo, nobody wants to sit here and listen to me talk 75% of the conversation. Don't get me wrong. It can be a 50-50 as much as interest goes, but what's the point of having a guest if I'm going to dominate the conversation? So, You really have to find that balance. But if the guest doesn't give you that opportunity, it just gives you those, 3-sentence answers, those really quick responses. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, now you have to think on the fly of another question to fill time, to push it along. I've had a few interviews like that. I haven't had a bad interview, but I've had challenging interviews. I've had interviews where I feel like I'm pulling teeth to really get something out of you. And listen, that could be because somebody's nervous. That could be because somebody just didn't really want to be doing this, or they thought they were interested and they realized that when they got here, this is a different type of experience. I don't know. But it could be tough. It could be tough. I would say those are the negatives. That or if somebody keeps talking and you're ready to really change the topic, but you're trying to find that, that double Dutch rhythm where you're just ready to jump into the conversation and interrupt it, and that can be tough too. But that's it. I would think that's it. I haven't had any, knock on wood, I haven't had any bad experiences, any disruptive guests. I think another thing that I would throw in there real quick is interviewing through like mobile interviews, like a Zoom or something like that. I've had plenty of those in the beginning of the podcast because of the pandemic, and those are only audio, so there's nothing you can see. But that's a negative. That could be negative too because there's no connection there. There's a delay. Sometimes you're talking over one another. So the vibe of an in-person interview is so much more real, literally. You don't get that with a mobile Zoom interview. So I would say that's a negative also. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation because there's times where you have to make magic happen if your guest isn't willing to kind of like get in there with you. Because on the flip side, I've had great interviews where it's just like the banter's there, the humor's there, the storytelling is there, the willing to pivot back and forth. Because sometimes as an interviewer, you have to like quickly flip the script or insert a question that you weren't prepared to insert. Maybe you heard them say something and it made you want to ask more about that particular statement, taking you away from the original question. There's different elements to it. So I'm learning as I go along, but yeah, I would say that is one of the negatives. How does the podcast affect your personal life? Pan, your questions are awesome because the podcast affects, is it affects or affects? The podcast affects everything about my life, my relationships. I mean, let's just get right to it. My wife is a ride or die, but I do have to honor the fact that my relationship, my marriage comes first. It comes before this podcast. The reason why I say that, and I say that unapologetically, is because everything falls apart without, the lady in my life. So I have to like honor that energy and refill that cup, so to speak. And there's times where that can get dicey. There's times where my wife just gets a little frustrated because I'm removing myself too much from the relationship. A lot of editing. Again, I've talked about that already. That takes time away from my family. So I've learned when it comes to my wife, my children, work, friendships, the few that I have, because I don't really go out that much. I've learned how to rely on a calendar, which I never really had to do that before. Rely on a calendar, schedule things so that when I tell my wife, these next 2 days, I'm not doing anything. I'm just chilling with you. But I really have to honor that, and I do for the most part. I feel like I have a moment where I goof up. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, I'm not a robot, but I feel like I do a good job of trying to better myself in that regard. But it does take a toll. I'll just give you a short answer in that regard. It does take a toll on your relationships. You just need to know which relationships are worth fighting for, and what relationships are better off just being pushed aside. And what I mean by that is like, friendships or jobs, coworkers and stuff like. I have two 15-minute breaks and a lunch break at work, and I work on my podcast during both my 15s and my 30-minute lunch. I sit at my desk and I work on my podcast. I try to do as much as I can, and so that I have time with my family. But that's not always. Sometimes shit pops up and you're working late, editing and taking time away from your family. So I appreciate those questions, Pan. It affects the family. It affects your relationships. You have to be willing to structure and discipline your schedule for your own well-being. Not so much, nobody sees that, nobody, your viewers or listeners or your fans, they don't see that shit. That's only for your benefit. Schedule your life so that you are honoring everything accordingly. Thank you so much. Oh, my health? Yeah, I have to really take care of my health. You can easily get wrapped up in and not getting enough sleep, eating crap. You know what I mean? My wife's my wife sent me some questions. Yo, get you a wife like Alexandra. What drives you to keep doing this? What brings you hope in what you do? What drives you to keep doing this? That I'm gonna fill my beer up because this is a loaded answer here. My family drives me. I'm 44 years old. I have 4 children. I've been working blue-collar jobs my whole life up until, well, even what I'm doing now is blue-collar. But nothing as extreme as what I was doing before. I say that because what drives me is being able to give my kids being able to give my kids a different experience with me as their father. Especially my 2 oldest. That's what drives me. I think any father can relate to that. What drives me is being able to have a life of dictation on my part and my part only, not dictation of anybody else. My part, and when I say my part, that's my wife and I, I dictate my life. I dictate my day. I dictate what I'm going to do this week. This is my life. These are my children. This is my wife. This is my life. And what drives me is taking the reins from somebody else's hands, the reins of my life, and putting them in my hands and saying, today I do this because I said so. And I am in a position to do so. And giving that to my kids. What brings you hope in what you do? Sharing people's stories and seeing the random strangers that comment and big up the reel that I shared or the episode that I shared, and agree or love or share their sentiments and positive feedback. That's what brings me hope. That's what brings me hope. Is like when I see people comment on an episode and they comment about something that took place towards the end of the episode, I'm like, okay, then you listen to the whole damn thing. I love that. Because the gist behind JMC is that we get an opportunity to hear somebody's story and learn more about one another. So it's either you take the time to better yourself by learning about people, or you don't. And I'm not saying learn it from a book or learn it because you visited, countries and you've seen people, or that you watched a movie or a documentary. You know what I mean? Like you actually just listen to somebody share their story. No holds barred, unfiltered, uninterrupted, uncut, candid, vulnerable. Take the time to listen to somebody's story. You may not relate, but to be able to say, wow, I never thought about that. Like, I go through that every time I'm interviewing somebody. So when I see people respond to the episodes and the interviews, it just brings me hope. It's like, all right, I'm going to keep doing this because this is working. This is worth it. And every week, I kid you not, it's like I'm like, it's a re-up for me. It's like, new episode. All right, let's go. New journey. How am I going to go about this one this week? So, that's what brings me hope. Thanks, baby, for making me cry. Thanks for being a phenomenal woman. A couple more questions here. This is from Karina. Karina Marie Padilla. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. How do you deal with lack of motivation? Have you ever gotten negative feedback, or how do you deal with constructive criticism? How do you deal with lack of motivation? I've learned listening to frequency playlists on Spotify, listening to atmospheric piano or lo-fi beats, something positive. Music plays a big role in snapping me out of a funk. So if I need motivation, I'll typically take a shower and I'll put something like that on. and I'll try to snap myself out because I deal with a lot of anxiety. I can get really wigged out and thrown into a funk simply because there's so many people talking at one time that I can't hear my own thoughts. So, the reason why I bring that up is because through that, I'll get unmotivated because I'm dealing with so much shit that I'll just shut down. And I'm not motivated anymore. But, nice good shower, a cup of coffee, something to just snap me out of it. Frequency playlist. I just had an interview with Saquon Hicks. It's coming out soon. And we talk about that towards the end of the interview. Listening to different frequencies depending on what your emotion is, what your current status and situation is. These frequencies help you lock in. And I'll listen to certain certain frequencies to snap me out of a funk, because the funk is what's taking away the motivation, really. It's just a mindset. Have you ever gotten negative feedback? Yes. And I don't mean negative feedback from the trolls on the internet, because you'll get those too. You'll get people that'll just comment on your shit just to be assholes. I get negative feedback from people that I know. It's not harsh, but it's negative. I think, at the end of the day, whatever you're creating and what you're trying to do, you want everybody to like it. And when somebody's like, I wasn't really feeling that this wasn't that good. I didn't like this. I didn't like that. I do listen to it. I am grateful for it. Sometimes I just throw it to the wayside, and sometimes I take an opportunity to really hone in on it. I'll be honest. My wife has been very fair with her criticism and her positive enforcement as well. It's just her honesty. So I'm grateful for that, because it's hard when it's coming from someone that close to you. But I've learned that I need to pick my battles with that. There's times where I decide maybe it's time that I listen to somebody else and adhere to what they're suggesting. And then there's times where I'm like, no, I don't give a shit. I'm doing it this way because this is exactly how it needs to get done, and I'll deal with the negative comments that come, because I know that there's positive comments out there. And I think that's another thing that nobody really thinks about, is just because you're not seeing a positive comment doesn't mean that there isn't a positive portrayal of your work from other people. What they've taken away from it is positive. They just never shared it with you. On a social media platform, they'll come up to you in person maybe and say it. And I have to be patient for those little gems, those little nuggets of positive affirmation that come later on. You're always looking for it immediately. But yes, to answer your question, yes, negative feedback, absolutely. How do you deal with constructive criticism? Well, I just answered that, I think, right? You got to pick your battles. You do have to come to a point where you have to understand that even though you think you know it all, you just don't. And you have to be able to put yourself in a position where if you're going to take constructive criticism, who are you taking it from? Don't take it from somebody that ain't doing shit. It's easier for me to take constructive criticism from somebody who is actively doing something in their own right. Right? So, back to Joe Schmo. Joe Schmo is just sitting on the couch, but he's got all types of constructive criticism. I pay it no mind, because Joe Schmo ain't doing nothing. He ain't doing nothing. So, pick your battles and be willing to humble yourself. The hardest thing to do is to humble yourself, but it's also the most liberating thing. So thank you, Karina, very, very much. And I got one more question to wrap this up. I believe this is the last one. I hope I didn't forget anybody. My boy Juan Rivera. I interviewed Juan about a year ago now, right, Juan? It was Christmas of last year. Shout out to Juan. What expectations did you have for the podcast when you started? Have they changed as you've grown? Yes, my expectation was, it's still the same. It was it was interviewing people about their journey. I've grown to realize that being Puerto Rican and having a podcast, that I have a platform for all of us to share our journeys, especially people of color. When you have an opportunity as a person of color to share some things that could be kind of like taboo to talk about in other places that may be uncomfortable for other people, I try to provide a platform where that is 1000% welcome, because that is the nitty gritty shit that we need to learn about one another. And I would think that is something that I've grown to really realize, the magic that was going on in that regard. Because innocently, when I started this podcast, I wanted to talk about everybody in their journey. I was aware that I wanted to talk about Black and brown people and talk about the things that we as Black and brown people talk about on a podcast. I just didn't realize the impact that was having. And so I think once I realized my responsibility in that regard, I decided to really honor it. So it didn't change. I think it just really became more special, and my awareness was heightened. My awareness of the role that I was playing as this mediator, interviewer, yeah. I think that's a perfect way to answer this question. Did I answer both of them, buddy? What expectations did you have for the podcast? Yeah. Have they changed as you've grown? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll be honest with you. There's times where I realize there's a lot of things I want to do on the podcast that aren't related to the theme of JMC, and I have to park those. That's something maybe for another podcast down the road, because I've already thought about maybe doing another type of podcast. I would like to do a podcast with somebody else and have that, co-host, cohort banter. I would love to do that. So there's a lot of different things that I've learned about myself in this podcast, these past 3 seasons. And the best thing that I can say is that never say never. Be willing to adapt and change, because that's where growth comes from. And humble yourself, because when you say no and you sleep on it, you'll realize that really you should be saying yes. Thank you so much to everybody for submitting your questions and getting them in. I hope you enjoyed this episode, this solo episode with yours truly, sitting here in my house slippers and shirt and jeans, sipping on my IPAs. Y'all be safe. Remember to maintain focus and stay continuous through all 4 seasons. My name is Felix C. Arroyo, and these are the Journeyman Chronicles. Y'all be safe.